Welcome to The Road. This is a weekly podcast of All Saints Lutheran Church. I'm your host, John Pedersen, and I serve as pastor. Each week, we reflect on faith, life, and navigating the road ahead. The language of journey is common when we think about life. It has its joys and challenges along the way, and we all need a little encouragement and guidance at times to keep us going. There's a word in the Bible, asphalia, which means truth, but it's the same root word we use in English for asphalt, if you can believe that. It's a solid surface that makes travel easier and more assured. And so every week we're going to be exploring elements of faith and life that keep us on the road. Faith isn't about living a perfect life. It's about finding our way, getting through rough spots, but seeking out those great vistas too. You can find my weekly message here, but you'll also find special conversations with guests who have insights on things like wellness, parenting, and living with unique purpose. If you appreciate this podcast, remember to subscribe where possible and share it with a friend. Here's this week's message. The words from today's gospel are just a bit shocking. The parables of Jesus always have a surprising twist to make a point. We wonder, is Jesus really applauding a dishonest manager? It's complicated. The manager makes deals with his boss's clients in a way that extends grace to them in his waning hours on the job to get in good graces. Many people then and many now still see grace and generosity as high-minded, unwise, and weak. But this parable shows that grace is smart. Grace is cunning. Grace is shrewd. If you don't embrace grace in your heart, embrace it because it's astute strategy. Grace gives room in difficult situations to break impasses, to move beyond the past into the future, to find a way forward. The final warning that you cannot serve both God and wealth is a recognition that the grace of God and maximizing assets don't always go together. This final bit of wisdom connects to my wider message today about gracious stewardship of resources and relationships. If you want to go deeper on this parable, you can listen to my message from 2022 by going to our YouTube page in week 2 of the Picture Grace series. But we're continuing with our series, What is Old is New Again, exploring some Old Testament passages and discovering the wisdom there for today. Today's story is from Amos 8, and it's a wake-up call. The prophet Amos is channeling God's frustration with people in the northern kingdom who were engaged in economic exploitation, corruption, and greed. He's calling out those who, quote, trample on the needy and bring to ruin the poor of the land and are literally rigging the scales. Amos is furious on God's behalf toward those who are corrupt and taking money away from those who have little. Old Testament scholar Donald Gowan wrote this about Amos 30 years ago. As Amos saw it, religion served only to reassure people that everything was all right, when in fact it was not. Religion said, be sure to observe the festival days, keep the sanctuaries in good order, and make the proper sacrifices, and that will provide a divine guarantee. He went on to say, should we say today, get prayer back into the public schools, and that observance will make ours a different nation somehow? Like contemporary society, the Israel Amos diagnosed had evidently lost the standard of public morality that had once been generally accepted and had provided an ethos that enabled people to live together in general harmony. In mid-8th century BCE Israel, as in contemporary society, that loss of standards led people to prey on one another. Amos is speaking against people who embrace the cover of spiritual piety without embracing the spirit of faith and a true relationship with God and their neighbors. To wear piety on the outside while undermining economic fairness and justice doesn't amount to real faith. The words of Amos here are not solely directed at a specific class of people, such as the ruling or the wealthy. They are intended for whoever they apply to, fellow peers or merchants cheating one another. It makes no difference. Prophets are interesting. Even in our contemporary context, I think people are intrigued by prophets. I want to spend some time thinking about the biblical prophets specifically today and who they were. The great 20th century Jewish scholar Abraham Joshua Heschel wrote a definitive work on the prophets. He explores in it the mind of the prophet. Heschel talks about the way that prophets are consumed with God's passion or emotion. They embody the thoughts and feelings of God. They're compelled to communicate God's message to us. God is angered by the ways the world goes off the tracks and how we harm our neighbors and support injustice. But God is also filled with compassion for us and wants us to experience life in a relationship with him and to be reconciled and reconnected to his people. And we can hear both of those kinds of words from prophets over time, words of condemnation at times, but also words of compassion and grace. Heschel writes this about the mind of a prophet like Amos. To us, a single act of injustice, cheating in business, exploitation of the poor is slight. To the prophets, a disaster. To us, injustice is injurious to the welfare of the people. To the prophets, it's a death blow to existence. Their breathless impatience with injustice may strike us, he says, as hysteria. We and the prophet have no language in common. To us, the moral state of society, for all its stains and spots, seems fair and trim. To the prophet, it is dreadful. So many deeds of charity are done, yet to the prophet, satisfying our conscience is a flight from responsibility. Our standards are modest. Heschel continues, the prophet is an iconoclast, one who destroys traditional religious or sacred images or principles, challenging the apparently holy, revered, and awesome. Beliefs cherished as certainties, institutions endowed with supreme sanctity, he exposes as scandalous pretensions. The words of the prophet are stern, sour, stinging, he says, but behind his austerity is love and compassion for mankind. What Heschel is saying is that biblical prophets like Amos are disruptors. When something is rotting and eating away at the people and its relationship with God and one another, they're rarely interested in having a polite conversation about it unless people are suffering, and then the prophet wants to share words of hope and encouragement. Many today see the value of prophets more broadly to speak into the deep state of problems. I believe all of us have at least some prophetic bone in our body. When we see suffering in someone that we care about, we want to speak a word of hope to them, to point them to a better day or a way forward. On the flip side, all of us have experienced or seen injustice in some way, personally or in people we know, and it can get under our skin. We want to do something about it. There's often a heroic quality attached to the prophets, ancient or contemporary, biblical or not, in their willingness to speak the difficult truth. Speaking truth is something many value, but I think it's important to acknowledge the downside of being a prophet. Heschel talks about that. He writes, the mission that the prophet performs is distasteful to him and repugnant to others. No reward is promised him, and no reward could temper its bitterness. The prophet is a lonely man. He alienates the wicked as well as the pious, the cynics as well as the believers, the priests and the princes. But to be a prophet means to challenge and to defy and to cast out fear. The prophet's eye is directed toward the contemporary scene. The society and its conduct are the main theme of his speeches, yet his ear is inclined to God. He is a person struck by the glory and presence of God, overpowered by the hand of God, yet his true greatness is his ability to hold God and man in a single thought. The prophet is not a mouthpiece, but a person, not an instrument, but a partner, an associate of God. It's the final word from Heschel for today. True prophets like Amos maintain a relationship with God. Amos doesn't speak these words expecting to be embraced and to win points or likes. Amos is cutting through the pretense of what the world has become and how it needs to change. He's speaking the truth about economic injustice, knowing he will make new enemies in the process. His only comfort is knowing that he is dwelling in the truth and in his relationship with God. These particular words of Amos remain relevant for us today. One of the most common themes in our society today across the political spectrum, which is pretty remarkable. is that a majority of Americans have been stretched thin when it comes to making a living. 2 working parents, credit card debt, and rising inflation make for a pretty tough mix. We know that our partner ICA, along with other agencies, is seeing increased demand of their services. I could pretty easily paint an equivalent modern picture of what Amos was talking about some 2,800 years ago and detail rising corruption and wealth among some. But often our conversations about economic concerns get bogged down in debates over policy. I've always believed that there's often more than one way to faithfully address a problem. Some approaches are certainly better than others, but there doesn't always need to be a shared embrace of policy based on whatever our group's position is. There needs to be a shared recognition of the problem. That's the starting point. That involves seeing the facts as they are, not as we want them to be. And in divided times, to get at the truth requires more than just someone like Amos pointing them out. There is a role for prophets and will continue to be, but if there weren't many, in reality, in ancient history, in biblical times, there weren't many that rose to the moment at that point as prophets. Like I said earlier, prophets were often confrontational. They stirred the pot, and like today, prophets often are ignored. Unwelcome messages simply get rejected. The prophets, more often than not, got run out of town or worse, and there are plenty of examples of that in the Bible. Today, as important as Amos and his message were, and as relevant as it is for today, I often wonder if we need fewer of us who seek to be prophets. Perhaps more of us need to relearn how to share our own true observations and insights in mutual relationships with gentleness and care with those who may not see it in the same way. We do need some people like Amos to speak the unvarnished truth, especially in gathering together with others. But we also need to reestablish respectful dialogue and connections and the foundations of truth. If you listen to philosophers of all people, they will tell you that truth is often accepted less through rational and intellectual exercises or presenting facts, and more through the people that we trust. That generally doesn't happen through one-way communication. And we can't establish that trust if we don't place relationships in some way over winning, which does bring us back to that point from today's gospel about grace. When we see so much out of whack with the world and those very relationships we care about, our modern impulse is to move heaven and earth, to exert our willpower to set it all right. And when it doesn't work, we want to try even harder and even more forcefully. Our impulse is to try and win. But sometimes in extending grace, we find a different way forward in which everyone is happier than they thought they would be. Is that naive? Is that terribly idealistic, foolish? Perhaps. There is something satisfying and even necessary about a prophetic word. But it certainly shouldn't be the only word. We do know this. Jesus himself lamented the ineffectiveness of both approaches in Luke 7 when he talked about his own more friendly approach and the prophetic approach of John the Baptist. He said, "To what then will I compare the people of this generation, and what are they like? They are like children sitting in the marketplace and calling to one another. We played the flute for you, and you did not dance. We wailed, and you did not weep. For John the Baptist has come eating no bread and drinking no wine, and you say he has a demon. The Son of Man has come eating and drinking, and you say, look, a glutton and a drunkard, a friend of tax collectors and sinners." In other words, no matter what we say, no matter what tone we use, and no matter what we try, this generation rejects truth and renewed relationship. Let the failures of that generation spoken of not be ours. I pray that all of us would seek to embrace the prophets and the friends who come to us with words of wisdom and find our way to the love and grace of God and a renewed love of our neighbors. And in doing so, may we together as a people work for the common welfare in justice and peace. Amen. That's this week's message. You don't have to navigate the road ahead alone. You can join with others at All Saints. Visit allsaintsmtka.org for more information. Have a great week.